Coming up on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show.
Security and privacy are uttered together so often that many believe they're the same thing. Well, they're not. Security is a technical issue and privacy is a business issue. And furthermore, privacy is only one type of liability that should be considered when talking IoT security. In this episode of the IoT Business Show, I add a bit of sharpness to the security and privacy narrative.
All this and more on this episode of the IoT Inc. Business Show. The people, the business, and the technology of the next generation internet. This is the IoT Inc. Business Show. And now, here's your host, Bruce Sinclair.
Hello and welcome to the IoT Inc. Business Show. This show is for business leaders and managers employing the Internet of Things for their business or the business of their customers. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair, and I interview the industry's leading authorities to find out how they use IoT to improve business and create value. If you like this show, subscribe to it on iTunes and go to iotinc.com to check out my complimentary articles, videos, meetups, and webinars.
If you've been listening to this podcast, then you might have heard me mention that I have my book coming out in June. The title of the book is IoT Inc., and the subtitle of the book is How Your Business Can Use the Internet of Things to Win in the Outcome Economy. The subtitle is a bit of a mouthful, I know. It makes it kind of challenging to fit on a book cover, but we have done that. Even at a thumbnail size, you can read at least the keywords, and it does have that all-important SEO words in there for search engines. I've decided that I'm going to do a number of short podcasts, these solo podcasts. I've done them before, but in this case, I'm going to focus them on different parts of the book that I think are important and are related to the shows that are going on. So it'll be like this one today. This will give you a good chance to judge whether or not you're going to like the book. I think if you do like this show, then you kind of know my thinking and you know my approach. But these topics I think we'll get into a little bit more detail and give you a little bit more, fodder to work with when you're making a decision whether or not you want to buy my book. Now, buying my book is a great way to give back. I think the actual deal works out to maybe 15% of the net, something like 15% of the net. So it's not like it's a big money maker. But for me, what's really important is to get the ideas out there. And of course, it leads to different things. I'll be also providing an online course, which is where I can make some income. So as you know, I've been asking for donations. That's been a bit of a disaster for this podcast, although I have received a couple. I'll talk about them later. A couple new ones. 3 in total, everybody. But like I said, this is a good way to give back. If you have been enjoying the show, if you have thought that the show has been giving you value, then it'd be great if you'd pick up the book. I found out a while ago that the book is going to be $28. Now, these books are always discounted, but that's going to be the base price for the book. And just today, I talked to my, project manager. In the old days, it would be called a typesetter, but it's the person laying out the book. And they also have budgets, targets for these, but it turns out with the amount of words and the number of diagrams that the book's going to be 300 pages. So it's actually a slightly thicker than a lot of the books that are on my bookshelf. Makes it a pretty good deal. That's less than 10 cents each. So, more about the book later, but today we want to talk about security and privacy. The last podcast, the Working in the Gray Zone podcast, that was more of a legal podcast, and the next episode is actually going to be an interesting one. It's going to be with the FCC. So it's going to be kind of legal as well. So I thought it'd be informative to put what we've been discussing and what we're going to be discussing in the context. Now first, security and privacy. A lot of times people conflate the two. They consider them being the same thing. And maybe it's just because you hear a disproportionate amount about privacy, specifically because it's more of a B2C consumer issue. So we hear a lot about it, but I want to first separate the two terms. Security is very much a technical term, and privacy is a business term. Now, it's a business term, or it's in the business realm, I should say, because it has to do with risk. So it's an issue of risk. Security is a technical issue because it has to do with this first line of defenses. However, a better way to think about this, better than security and privacy, which is generally what you'll read in conferences and you'll read in articles, but a better way to think about this, technical versus business, is security versus risk management. In fact, this is a chapter in one of my books. I think that might be the actual name of the chapter. So let's go through both of them. So security, my opinion with security, and again, if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know it really drives me nuts, all the doomsayers. And I know it's just a way to sell links, because people will be more likely to click on something that's negative than positive. But we've been doing IT security for, gosh, how many years? 50 years? And the world hasn't fallen down, and I have the same opinion on IoT security. We're not going to get it right. In fact, we're never going to get it right, because security and IT and IoT are the same thing. You're always just trying to be one step ahead of the bad guys, the black hats. But in any case, security and IoT, like in IT, you can think about it in three different ways. The first way is confidentiality, and that is making sure that the data that you have is confidential, so protecting it so people can't read it. The second thing that's important is integrity, so making sure that the data that you have hasn't been changed. And the third way, and the third component of security that I find useful, is accessibility. And that is making sure that you can access that data. Now, risk, the counterpart to security, the business counterpart to security, it corresponds to each one of these, and I'll go through them in a minute. But risk really comes down to a simple equation. Risk is equal to the probability of that breach happening times its liability. And generally what you do is you normalize these from 0 to 1. And this is part of a risk assessment. Again, you can read about it in more detail in the book. But when you do a risk assessment, you're looking at all the attack vectors, or I like to call them attack volumes, a little bit more encompassing specifically for IoT. And you're doing this exercise. What's the probability, which is more of a technical decision. So this has to be both technical folks and business folks in the room at the same time working on this risk assessment. So risk, again, is the probability times the liability. The probability is what's the likelihood that this breach is going to happen, whether it's a breach in confidentiality, a breach in integrity, or a breach in accessibility, times the liability. Now, the liability can be in a number of different ways. So let's go through the liabilities for the three different types of securities. For confidentiality, this is where we get into privacy. So the liability for a breach that reveals confidential information, sometimes it's called PII, or personally identifiable information, is the liability. So again, when we hear security and privacy, really privacy is just one type of risk, and it is the risk that's associated with confidentiality. So this is the concept of being able to tap into either data in motion, which is more of an IoT phenomena, more or less, and also data at rest, but getting at it and being able to read it or decipher it into some form. And where privacy comes in is that data could be personal information, and you could use that data, or the bad guys could use that data to do other things with it, to do nefarious, negative things with that information. So confidentiality, or the risk associated with confidentiality, is privacy. Now let's look at integrity. So integrity, the risk there is going to be, well, maybe it's going to be the risk of what some people talk about when they're referring to autonomous vehicles. And this is, if you were to insert some commands, let's say, in a machine. Now, this is where IT and IoT obviously is different. Where in IoT, we're in the physical world. It's not just a matter of being in the cyber world or in the virtual world. And the physical manifestations can be something that can hurt humans. So if you can insert commands in an autonomous vehicle, drive it off the road, in some commercial machinery or some industrial machinery or some commercial equipment, there could be some issues. So integrity issues, this is a different type of security. So we're always kind of going back and forth on the technical and the liability. So on the technical side, with confidentiality, this is generally the old school methodology of putting a perimeter around, whether it's a firewall or maybe it's going to be some sort of an encryption, but it's going to be more the IT type of security. And we're trying to prevent people from coming in. With integrity, we're doing the same thing, but we have different tools. Now, these tools, we've been seeing AI and analytics being used a little bit more, where you analyze the information that's on the OT network, the operational technology network, or the IT network, the information technology network, and just making sure that things seem right. Now, there's different ways of doing this. You can do anomaly detection. There are some companies that actually refer to state diagrams. But again, for integrity, from a technical point of view, you're making sure the information in the network, whether it's the OT or IT in the fog, is correct. But the risk isn't privacy, right? What the risk is going to be other types of liability. So it might be a liability in getting someone hurt. So the liability is going to be some sort of a judgment if you go to court, and a judgment that can come down against you if your product wasn't properly secured. The third one is accessibility. So again, on the technical side, it's accessibility. Now, what this means, unlike the confidentiality and unlike the integrity, the accessibility just means that you can access the service. In this case, it's an IoT product. It could be a banking service in the IT world, but you can access it. Now, in the IT world, what prevents this accessibility is overflowing the interface, the communication interface, with what they call distributed denial of service attacks or denial of service attacks. Now, these are kind of scary because to be able to perpetrate a denial of service attack doesn't cost very much money. Now, it's not like it's openly available, but if you do go in the dark web, or not even have to go that far into the dark web, you can find these services, and it's really DDoS as a service. And what they do is they have I like the name, but a zombie pack of computing devices. They can be servers all the way down to IoT devices, and they will focus those devices by sending requests on the interface of the service and flooding it so that no one else can access it. So in the case of IT, what this means is you can't access, let's say, a particular website or a particular service. I mentioned banking earlier. But in the case of IoT, it's a little bit different because it could be that you can't access a machine that you need to use. Now, what's the liability associated with that? So that's the technical. So again, we're always looking at security versus risk. The risk there is that if this machine has been purchased and it has let's say an SLA, a service level agreement associated with it, which they will, then if you can't access your machine, then perhaps there's some risk to the manufacturer from the consumer, or from, I should say, the purchaser, that they weren't able to access their machine. Their machine, this act costs so many dollars per hour, per day, per month, whatever the case may be, and potentially there's a liability associated with that. And just a bit of a clarification on DDoS attacks. in IoT. We don't want to get mixed up, because what I'm talking about here is using zombies to attack an interface to an IoT product. What we've heard about lately, a long time ago, was the fridges, and most recently cameras. That's using IoT devices as those zombies and using them to attack, in these cases, not IoT devices, but IT services. So IoT can be attacked by zombies in DDoS attacks, but they can also, since they are computing devices, and lots of them, because it's not that complicated to do a request for service. And that's why these very small devices are very effective, or that's why these small IoT devices are very effective to be the zombies. But of course, in both cases, security is involved. We want to have security to prevent our IoT devices from the confidentiality, integrity, accessibility, and maybe the fourth one, the zombie type of security attack. So when you listen to the next episode, I just want you just to go through in your mind the differences, and when you read different websites and when you read different stories and so forth, that again, security and privacy are two different things, but a better way to think about it is security and risk. And in security, we've got the three different types of security, generally speaking: confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility. And associated with each one of those is a risk. And where privacy comes in, that's the risk, or one of the risks, I should say, or one of the liabilities, I should say, associated with people accessing personally identifiable information. Now, I find myself doing this, so I just want to clarify. I often use risk and liability interchangeably, and that's not correct. Risk is the probability of the technical breach happening times the liability. So yes, there's a risk associated with confidentiality, and there's also a liability associated with confidentiality. But really the risk is that liability times the probability of it happening. So that's it for this show. I think it's just the main point here is that both security and risk management go hand in hand. Technical and business go hand in hand. So whenever you're talking about security, you have to be talking about risk management. And whenever you're talking about risk management, you have to also be talking about security. Well, hopefully that was useful. It's never obvious to me when doing these monologues. But remember, this topic is covered extensively in my upcoming book, IoT Inc. Okay, well, that was episode 76. That's a great number for a lot of reasons. Now, when I say this, I'm talking about the episode number, not the episode itself. So a funny story is I was at a conference giving a presentation, a keynote to an IoT tech conference, and someone came up to me and they said, "Oh, I think you should know that at the end of your podcast, I don't think you meant to record what you said because you said something about it being a bad podcast." And I kind of scratched my head and I was thinking back, geez, I don't remember ever doing that. I mean, in fact, I don't remember ever having a bad podcast, but I was still freaked out. So I went and I asked them what issue it was, and I looked for that episode, and I found the episode, and there I am on the show floor with the phone to my ear because it's super loud, and I'm trying to listen to the end of the episode. And I realized that what I said was I didn't like the episode number. And he interpreted that maybe it was just in passing, maybe he was jogging or he was walking the dog or whatever the case would be, but he interpreted that as me saying I didn't like the episode itself. So when I do talk about liking or not liking the episode numbers, it's about the number itself, and I've got lots of reasons that I like certain numbers more than other numbers. In any case, good number or bad, to get the show analysis notes, just go to iot-inc.com/podcast, or just go to the website, find the podcast, and you'll see a write-up that I do on it, plus the links and the ability to get the transcript. If you've been enjoying this show or finding this show useful to you, there's 3 ways, or actually there's 4 ways you can support this free podcast. The first way is with social. On those show analysis notes, if you're on there with your mobile phone on the bottom, you can click on the Twitter or the LinkedIn icons and share it with your contacts. And it's on the left-hand side if you're on your desktop. Secondly, you can go to iTunes. I really enjoy the reviews. You can either just do a rating, which is just clicking stars. Hopefully it'll be a bunch of stars. Or you can take a few minutes to write a review. To get there, you need to use the iTunes app. You can get there by typing in iot-inc.com/iTunes or just use your mobile phone or desktop to bring it up. The third way, and this is kind of becoming a little bit of a joke, I've been having a number of email discussions, and that is you can leave a donation. You can leave a donation with PayPal. It's not the most elegant solution, but it is possible. I have a couple new shout-outs. The first goes to Duncan Fraser for his $25 donation, and he had a good idea, and he wanted me to share with you that the way he thought about it was buying a box set of DVDs. He thought with now there's been 76 episodes, he thought it was definitely worth the price of a box set because he was having a hard time, how much should I donate, and just framing it. So maybe if you think about it that way, that would be great. The second shout out goes to Nova Tips. And I think they're out of Singapore. There wasn't an email, but they came in with a whopping $88 donation. Maybe that's 100 Singaporean dollars, I'm not sure. So in either case, big thank you to both. And as I mentioned to Duncan in the email exchange, it's not so much the money. This is more like beer money or coffee money, but it's more just the recognition in this that I know that people do and people are enjoying it. I'll have to monetize this in a different way. And the fourth way that's coming up, well, it's going to be my book. So if you like the podcast, you're going to like the book. And it's not out till June of 2017, but you can buy the book. I'm your host, Bruce Sinclair. Thank you for listening. Till next time, may your path to IoT business be a safe one.
You have been listening to the IoT Inc. Business Show.